It looks like we're live. People are starting to join. Let's see. Some things here. How are you today, Alex and Mark? Feeling good? Excited about this conversation?
100%. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Same, very excited. Love the topic.
Yeah, looking forward to see what people are struggling with. What are the doubts and questions they're gonna shoot. Let's see the maturity level within the companies. This is no new topic, not whatsoever, but still challenging for many companies, for many teams. So it's going to be great to share ideas and share experiences with you both. Let's just give people a couple more minutes to join. We'll start with some housekeeping rules to let anyone understand how this will work. And we start in 2 moments. Just check if everything is working fine. It does. So just to check the interaction, people who are coming to us via the LinkedIn session, the live streaming. If you would like to post where are you coming to us from, just share on the messages for us to understand where people are connecting. We can check the interaction. This is going to be important for follow-up questions later. So if you can, share with us where are you guys based, any relevant, important, challenging goals for 2023. We'd love to know what people are about this time. And we're going to start in a few minutes. Okay, looks like we're good to go. There's a good amount of people already there. So a couple announcements before we move in. There's going to be a Q&A session, a space for Q&A at the end of this session. So don't worry about losing the moment. Share your questions on the chat via LinkedIn. There will be people from the Birdie team organizing, collecting the questions. They will bring to us when the moment is proper. We're going to have an open, informal conversation here. So feel free to suggest, ask anything that is not clear for you. At the right moment, we address that. And starting, welcome everyone who is coming to us from the LinkedIn. I'm Pence. I'm one of the co-founders here at Birdie. I'm with the product team. Today we have 2 major, important, really excited to have those guests with us today. Before I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, but just before we go in, for those of you who doesn't really know what Birdie is about, we are creating this product analytic platform for product teams. So it's really important to learn how your users are interacting, to learn what they like, to learn what is driving their satisfaction, really take feedback and analytics seriously. We try to build this connection between consumers and the teams that build product to build better products and better services for the market. So if you're willing to learn a little bit more, we're going to share a link to our beta program. Feel free to click and to follow up to learn a little bit more about us. We're probably backed by some leading VCs such as SoftBank, Illuminate, and Fusion Fund. and we are already helping worldwide clients such as Microsoft, HP, career-wise, and Roller worldwide, so Oceania, Africa, Europe, and the US, which of everyone already taking the benefits of really being closer to their users' feedback and analytics to make better decisions. So without further ado, let's meet our guests. We're with both of them here today, Alex and Mark. I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves. Alex, the VP in Momentive. I want to take a moment, Alex, to show the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be able to join and talk about this very important topic that I'm extremely passionate about. So a little bit about me. I'm Alex Bass. I'm a product leader with over 15 years of experience in product management, product marketing, and consumer insights for both B2B SaaS and D2C products. Currently, I'm the Vice President of Product Management at Momentive.ai, makers of SurveyMonkey. Hopefully, some of you have heard of that product. My team is responsible for SurveyMonkey, Wufoo, which is our forms product, SurveyMonkey Apply, and Audience, which combined drove about $500 million in revenue last year. My interests have always come to sort of this intersection of technology, insights, and strategy, and applying those disciplines to improve products or customer experiences or marketing outcomes. Those are things that I love to do. And as a leader, my goal is to foster a culture of collaboration and accountability, instill a growth mindset, advocate for experimentation, and fully invest and respect the craft of creation within the product space.
It's amazing. That's great. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us talking about feedback, right? SurveyMonkey. Yeah, the
Absolutely.
platform is feeding the world with feedback. That's nice. It's amazing. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's great. Mark, who was until recently at Intercom, I think you have some updates for us today. Want to take some moments to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Mark Abraham. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, as you say, I was at Intercom just before Christmas. There was a round of layoffs. Unfortunately, my role was affected. I was a senior group product manager there, really focused on customer support, automated customer support, so chatbots and self-serve content. And I only last week started a new role at a company called Informa Tech, which is a global company really focused on B2B content in the form of online content. So there's lots of media brands under Informa Tech and really big sector-specific events like Black Hat, which is a big cybersecurity event in Vegas, which happens every year. And like Alex, I've been in product management for a long time, for about 12 years now. And one of the consistent themes in my product management career, both as a product leader and as an individual contributor, and having worked across a variety of sectors, I've worked in B2B SaaS, I've worked in e-commerce, fintech, music streaming, is the voice of the customer. And that's, again, like Alex, why I'm so passionate about this topic and really excited to be part of the panel discussion today.
That's great. It's also an honor to be with you today. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Good luck on the new challenges. I'm pretty sure you're going to shine and create beautiful solutions and amaze the world. That's awesome that you brought the voice of the customer being said and mentioned by product people. Usually we have that feeling that, okay, voice of customer, something that you should take to CX. We prefer to do interviews, we prefer first party. It's great to see that this is relevant, important. The thing is, it's not easy to access, it's not easy to use, right? So I think due to the existing and actual, the current challenges to get it, it tends to take in second in the background. And there's no one more important feedback than the other. The ability to combine them and to use them the proper way, in the proper moment, for the proper usage is what makes this so beautiful. Just connecting with our challenges and the thing we're building, we see that voice of customer is so many different challenges and so many different channels, so many different moments on the customer journey. The challenge is to connect all of those different platforms and sources of feedback, finding the consistent story among all of them. What are they sharing before they become a user, before they become a client? how they create expectations towards moving down towards the bottom of the funnel once they're converted, how they transform those expectations into reality and perception, how to avoid creating dissatisfaction. It's amazing to see all this step, this journey, this funnel coming reality. And it's a huge challenge to bring all of this. But not only voice of customer, so let's start from the beginning to welcome everyone and to start building an understanding and a mindset on top of this. Start with a very basic, very simple. We heard about data-driven, data-informed, data-inspired. How are they different? Is there a right approach? I should start with any of them. Is there more right, more wrong? Mark, how do you see this? What can you share with us?
Yeah, I've personally, and maybe that's colored by the environments I've worked in, the organization I've been part of, the products I've worked on, I opt for the kind of data-informed approach, which in my my experience, that means that data is a critical factor, but it's not the only factor that you need to consider when making decisions. If you offset that against being data-led, it means that you've got data, quant or qual, and that's going to make the decision for you. I find in reality that sometimes there's more considerations than just the data that feed into a product decision or prioritization decision. It could be strategic, it could be regulatory. And again, data is a factor in that decision-making process, and it informs the decision, but it's not, it is a decision point, but it's typically not the only decision point in my experience. And to be super honest with you, it's the first time I hear about the term data inspired. So I'd love to learn more about, from my own understanding, what that means and how that compares to data informed versus data led.
Yeah, that just to throw another flavor, say there's no right or wrong, right? That is the approach that makes more sense. And since this is not an individual initiative, it's an organization, needs to become part of a routine. So everyone needs to make this into a living thing. Alex, what's your approach to this?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because, so I'll start with how I think about those three terms, and then sort of how I've seen the level of usage of data change within product management and terminology change within product management over time. So data-driven is really, the data is leading you, right? You're kind of following a trail of the data. And I think the challenge that happens when you anchor on terms like data-driven is we all kind of want to follow a trail of data, but the challenge is that sometimes that data leads you to a place that doesn't make any sense that you can rationalize within the strategy of your organization. And that's when it starts to become a little bit disconnected. And it's hard for you to then sell your strategy, your story, your point of view to the rest of the organization when that's kind of how you're looking at things. Data informed is, agree with everything that Mark had said already as well. You're using it, but you're also bring your own point of view, your experience, your intuition to the table, and you're almost also guiding what data you're looking at, how you're analyzing it, and all of those elements that then play a role in terms of what insights you're able to garner. And data inspired, Mark, I agree with you. I think this one is a little bit of a newer term, right? Not necessarily has permeated the kind of industry quite yet. And the way that I think about data inspired is data informed. You've got a point of view that you're trying to either validate, not validate, or you've got a specific query you're trying to answer. So you're collecting data with a purpose. Data inspired, I think, is even a little bit more abstract from that. So it's almost like on a continuum. You may not even, have a specific objective in mind, and you're just trying to look for patterns across lots of different areas, different sources, different industries, potentially even. And so it's almost like you can take even more liberties within the data inspired space than you can within the data informed space. And so for me, the place that I'm probably the most comfortable is in data informed. I think that just I like to push my teams to think about what are you trying to answer, because collecting random data and trying to generate a story off of that just is such a challenging practice to then actually have it come out the way that you're hoping that it does. And it's been interesting because I don't know if you've noticed this, Mark, as well, but it seems like a few years ago, data-driven was all the rage. Everyone was saying how they were data-driven, their teams were data-driven. There was this like real push for that. And then now we've all kind of realized, and I say all kind of loosely, that maybe being driven by data isn't always the best approach. You need this intention that you have as an organization, as a team, as an individual, to look at specific information and have that be the driving force between what you're actually using that data for. And so I've seen this major shift between people now almost blacklisting the term data-driven and really in favor of the term data-informed, and trying to draw a line in the sand between those two elements. Curious about your experience, Mark.
No, absolutely +1. I think also the reality on the ground is that a lot of organizations, even the ones that talk about being or wanting to be data-driven, don't necessarily always have the data, whether, like you said, is the data might not be reliable. They might not have anything to go on. They might not be operating at the scale where they have the data that, you know, to help make decisions. So I think that's one of the reasons, in my experience at least, why people moved away from data-led and focus much more on data-informed. I think you mentioned a critical thing there, which I think is worth double-clicking on, is really thinking about what do you want to learn. And it goes back to the point we made earlier in the conversation about you've got all these sources of information, all these data points, but I think the onus is on us as product people to be really crisp about what do we want to learn and why. I think that's, in my experience, that's typically the harder part.
Yeah.
Finding the data and then linking the data is easier. I'm not saying it's, you know, depending on the organization and the state of your data warehouse and all the rest of it and different systems, but really being very clear about what do I want to learn? What questions do I have of the data? How do I going to get the answers? Is that through quantitative research? Is that through qualitative? And I think that's the bit that we often tend to overlook, and we go straight into the data. And I think it's that it's an important step to really focus on first.
That makes a lot of sense. All that you guys are sharing, regardless of how much data you're gonna use in which moments and how much you're gonna trust and be led by it. We can all agree that it's important to use data to make the decisions somehow, right? And right at this point, 2023, companies still struggle to do that. We have challenges. We have, as you mentioned, Mark, operational challenges that are hard to overcome, but the hardest part is knowing what to ask the data, knowing what to expect, being able to frame good questions, being able to frame open enough questions that data can allow you. And I think what you guys are sharing is only being data-driven falls short on the big picture. So maybe you're only seeing the stuff that users are providing, the analytics and the events and the data, because that's the only path they have. Maybe they're not seeing another direction, another path that. But if we don't take other dimensions in consideration, maybe we can make a decision in the dark. So that's why people are moving more from data-driven to data-informed, to take in consideration the context, right? The big picture to help them. And the more data sources, the more types of different feedback we can bring in, the more it helps with the big picture. Because we can take in consideration things that are not necessarily available to check, qualitative feedback, things that are not necessarily feedback, the questions they bring, frequent questions they bring, and what this tells us about the clarity of our positioning and communication. So it's so subtle and so rich, all the details we can take out of this. This is good. Let's go a little deep on the hacks and the good practices and the things you guys have learned while implementing this. Let's say a typical Tuesday, a product executive, what is it? What are the numbers they should be taking a look at? What makes the analytics and the feedback and the analysis an ongoing process and not something we only look at once every quarter and we plan everything, we don't get back to look at it? How does a successful program look like on the ongoing basis? Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's interesting because it's questions like this that will get you less satisfying answers, like it depends, right? And I think it depends on the organization, the context, like what company do you work for, who's your customer, what tools do you have, what skills does your team have, what access to data do you have, what is your measurement strategy, all of those things shift, because even through my career, when we were kind of anchored on a sales-led motion, there were different elements of the metrics we were tracking than when we have a self-serve kind of experience where people can convert directly through the product itself. So I think those things will drive some of the answers for what you're going to essentially see within different organizations. For me, the thing that I anchor on a regular basis is really product usage, right? What are people using? Where are they getting the value? That's one component. I want to see that the things that we've put into the product, the things we think are highly valuable, are actually being perceived that way by the users. The other piece is the feedback around satisfaction. And sometimes it's NPS, sometimes it's customer satisfaction, sometimes it's customer effort score, right? Whatever the metric of choices for the organization, I think getting that sense of not just are people using it, but that experience feedback around, do they like using it? Do they feel like they're getting value out of it? Is it something that that solves their problems, that they enjoy using? Those are elements that are critical to understand as well. And then, of course, lots of other data points. Like I, come from a background of research, and so I like to plug in data that has sources from research on a regular basis. And so we will do research to understand, product prioritization features and, different opportunities that exist and competitive intel and who's investing where, so that we can leverage all of that data and think more strategically about how do we take our product to the next level for our customers and where are they going to find the most value.
Yeah, I think at a high level, I find that, especially if you're asking, on a let's say on a weekly basis, Dave McClure's Pirate metrics, is it AA, I think it stands for acquisition, activation, revenue, and referral, I think, or retention.
Referral, yeah.
Exactly. But, those, I see those as the kind of, lagging indicators that, give you a really good kind of snapshot each week of the health of your business and of your product. And obviously from there, you start working backwards and saying, okay, what are the leading indicators that really move the needle on any of those kind of lagging indicators as part of that funnel? Because again, it typically comes down to acquisition, retention, or revenue. I think that the one thing I always find with just purely being focused on the number and looking at the numbers rather and analytics, it doesn't always, more often than not in my experience, tells you the why. And again, that ties in with the point that Alex was making, is that you do need to speak to customers, or you need to just look at customer reviews or what customer support is hearing to really give you an understanding of why you're seeing certain trends from an acquisition point of view, or why people are churning. Because again, the pure hard analytics more often than not won't give you, you might have assumptions or hypotheses around that, but it won't give you the answer.
Yeah. And currently on the existing stack for product analytics, is this there? I mean, if a team is looking there, following the track and say, yeah, we're churning users on this step, there's something that is becoming a block, or something that is becoming a high relevant friction here, and we're losing the users, losing their attention. What is there? What's in place to serve this kind of exploration? How to go deep on the things that are available today?
Yeah, so I would say there are individual pieces of data that exist that can help you tell the story, right? So I can answer the churn question, but can I answer the why for the churn question? That's a different question, right? And so I can see drops in engagement, but can I understand why? And so I think that there's a disconnect between understanding the factual experience of your customers and your business and some of the revenue and engagement metrics that you have versus understanding the experiential perceptions that are being generated in that in that flow, right? Are they feeling like there's another product out there that's better? Are they getting frustrated by blockages in the product? Is the pricing a factor? Is this other thing over here, customer support, a factor? There's a lot of different elements that influence what somebody feels about your organization, your brand, and your product. And oftentimes we are looking at a very, very thin slice of what that is. Most of the time, just the factual piece, not the holistic view of how all of these different elements are contributing to the challenges. And so I think what ultimately results out of that scenario is you're optimizing on the things that your team individually is paying attention to, and that may not be the thing that's going to be the biggest lever for you to shift whatever's happening within your organization. And I've seen that in several teams and companies be a continuous challenge.
A lot of struggling to prioritize top to bottom, bottlenecks or bottom to up. You a couple minutes ago you mentioned lack of skills on the team to make use of all of this. Maybe the organizational, the structure, and all the different 17 maybe platforms where everything comes together. We see that with all of this in place, companies still live their lives. They're operating, they're creating new stuff. So it's kind of, okay, we're talking about the importance of this analytics strategy, how this can help make everything look better and run smoother and provide better solutions. But hey, we're living without it. So is it nice to have? In your perception, how this changes once everything comes in place? What will be different in the next day once the 17 platforms, they are connected, they are smooth, just providing a constant flow of feedback getting in, combined with the quantitative data? What changes in terms of that becoming a reality? And
do you want to kick that one off, Mark?
Alex, just following up your last comments.
So sorry, was that to me?
To you, yes, Alex.
Yes. So I would say that there are layers of challenges here as well. So if we were to have, because we currently have lots of data centralized in different systems, if we were to centralize them into one system, then I think that you've got other challenges, which is, what is the question that you're trying to solve for? And which type of data is going to be the most useful for you? And that requires expertise and understanding of data and data strategies, right? So I think there is this sense of there's different team members that are going to be more comfortable with different types of data, different types of analytics. And so I think that there's potentially a gap where even if you did centralize everything, not everybody feels as comfortable with all of the different data sources and then won't necessarily use them all. I think the other challenge is a human challenge, which is we all come to work with our biases, and we've had different experiences, and we've worked in different contexts and seen different organizations and felt different pains. And so what ultimately surfaces is we all have this predisposition that we're going to look for data that's going to have this confirmation bias, right? I have a really good idea. Here's this piece of data that proves that I have a really good idea. And maybe there's 4 other pieces of data that prove that the good idea that I have might not actually be as effective as I think it's going to be, but I'm not looking for those, right? I'm looking for the one that's going to prove to me that the idea that I have is helpful. And so I think that one thing I would say that is important on the culture and the talent side is not only to create a scenario in which you've made it as easy as possible by surfacing the data in one system that can facilitate the needs of the broader org, but then pushing the team to not leverage data as solely a validation exercise, right? I have this belief. Can I find a percentage point that's high enough that proves that my belief is correct, at least enough to me so that I can move forward? But really to use it as an opportunity to pressure test the idea so that you are also considering other concepts, other ideas, other places of investment. It's almost like using the data to zoom out. I might think this is a good idea, but is there data that helps me understand that this might have less of an impact than this other thing that I'm not even considering exploring, and what is really the best use of the organization's resources to have the highest impact for the company, for customers, for the team as a whole.
I think it's also good to make a distinction between the kind of data or the confidence that you need to have to start something, or the confidence that you need to see when something is live. And again, we're getting into the territory of talking about experiments, because the reality might be that you might not even have the data that you can, to Alex's point, that you can use as a lever, but you can be really disciplined about saying, I've got a few assumptions. For these assumptions to be true, I need to see X increase or decrease in real customer behavior. And that for me is, such an important yardstick, and that really kind of, creates, keeps everyone honest. I think that's one thing to make a distinction between, what confidence do we need? Do we just look at existing data? Do we need to see real behavioral data playing out in real time? And I totally agree with Alex, your point about that kind of mindset, because it's really about, again, coming back to educating people using the data, is really getting, because it's easy to say, oh, if I pick that metric, that will prove my hypothesis. But really getting to think about check metrics, because again, typically things don't, like Alex said earlier, things don't happen in isolation. We're thinking about a system here. So something goes up, but something else might well go down and might disprove your hypothesis. But even just that thinking about check metrics and disproving your hypothesis is something that you have to be familiar with, or you have to be comfortable with, because I've met lots of really smart people with the right intentions who didn't necessarily think about things that could go wrong, or again, those check metrics.
Yeah, that's a good. I'm thinking about two other things here, maybe closer to the operational aspects of getting data and using that on the product life cycle management. So towards the steps, something new is being created, data has one role into it. Maybe you have less information to use data to make decisions there. How would we usually treat the role of data in the different steps, different moments? Maybe this can lead us to another thing that I'm wondering now is product ops, something that is new, and how this role, all this operation in these new terms, and what this means in terms of shifting responsibilities with PMs and product ops teams, and how does all of these interacts with user research? That is another way of getting data in, getting feedback, getting perception of the user in. So getting back to the beginning, product management life cycle, different moments, and how does data goes into creation and something that is ongoing. Mark.
Yeah, I think the first thing to highlight, and again, this is also why I'm a firm believer in the kind of data-informed approach, because the number of times where we looked at new products or new features and there is no data, and you don't want that absence of data to be a showstopper for launching something to the market. The challenge, at that early stage is really about, well, how quickly can we start getting some data, whether it's qualitative from talking to customers, or hearing from customers, or quantitative from having it out there and people using it. So that's the first thing. I think the product ops aspect is an interesting one, because again, in my experience, that comes into play when your product organization and your broader product portfolio reaches a certain level of maturity. So where I've introduced product operations, my rule of thumb is if you have 10 plus product managers, that might warrant having a centralized kind of product ops function. And again, that role is still, I don't know what your experience is, Alex, but still it's a relatively new role. It's evolving. Yeah. It means different things for different organizations. But for instance, where I introduced it, one of the places I've worked at, which is ASOS, big fashion e-commerce brand here in the UK, was one of the big tasks that that product operations team had and did was really creating a centralized dashboard, because we were creating a lot of waste with product managers every time, trying to go into different places, trying to reinvent the wheel, looking for data, And, we needed one person to really own the data and own the repository of that data. And again, that's where, particularly if you're operating at a certain scale from a product org and a product management and a product design perspective, it really helps to have a product operations function. But again, if you listen to Marty Kagan, he believes that you don't need product operations. So, I think it's still something that's, debatable, but I definitely see the value of it as a supporting function.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of product development lifecycle processes to the extent that your organization is mature. I think like if you've got a product line and a team that truly understands, the customer's needs, you can get away without it. But anytime you're trying to take a group of product managers who are all working on a subset of the same product and trying to get to a better holistic experience for the customer, without a process that is consistent across the board, you run into trouble. And I think you run into trouble in a couple of different ways. I think product management is done so vastly differently across different organizations. And like Mark and I have said, different data sources, different customers, different like tolerance of risk within organizations, different levels of agility. Is your agility in the development side? Is your agility upfront on the PDLC side and refining concepts and ideas? You can have kind of agility across the whole scope of the product management lifecycle. And some of the choices that you make are driven by resourcing and the organization's culture and the people and the skills and the preferences and all of those different elements. And so for me, getting to a place where I have consistency across the board so that when you're onboarding new talent, it's easier to walk them through. Here's what our process looks like. Here's the sources of data that are consistent across the board so that not every product manager has to go set something up. Because when I join most organizations, what will happen is you join and you start to look at the process and you realize there's not a huge one because people like to do the job differently. But then the challenge is when you're comparing opportunities for strategic opportunities for the organization, right? You're comparing apples to oranges and you're like, well, this thing is going to generate $17 million in the next 2 years, and this thing is going to drive NPS 30 points, right? And which one's better? You're operating and comparing across two completely different elements, and maybe both are important to the organization, but if you can't execute both of those things at the same time, you've got to make a choice. And so that data consistency and alignment helps reduce friction on the decision-making side and more confidence in that decision-making and priority setting and clarity. The other piece really is also that how many times, and I'm sure people on the call have experienced this as well, you're like, okay, I've got this really good strategy, this really good idea, I'm going to go after it. And somebody will ask you, oh, how are you going to measure the effectiveness of that? And you say, well, I'm going to measure it by using these two metrics, right? That would measure it effectively and really well and would tell you the true story of what's going on. And then the person tells you, oh, we don't capture that yet. And so then the product manager, almost the starting point isn't even on the idea itself, but it's like, okay, if you're really starting, one of two things happens, right? If you're really starting this project, you're either going back to, all right, step one, get this thing measured and get a baseline. Step two, start iterating on this project, right? So now you're extending the life cycle of that challenge. Or two, oh no, I don't have this data. Oh, well, I'm sure it'll work out fine, or I'll use this other proxy metric that kind of maybe addresses it, but doesn't quite address it. And now you're just creating a culture where the entire team is just accepting of this ambiguity because you don't have these specific metrics and you're choosing intentionally not to invest in them because it's more important to get the products and the ideas and the things shipped into the experience itself. And so I think it's really critical to kind of centralize both the data elements as well as the process to get to be more efficient in the product development lifecycle, because the job's hard, right? There's so many different things you have to do, so many different groups you have to work with, so many different altitudes of information, both at the organizational strategy level, all the way down to individual, user stories from time to time, that it's challenging to do that with a team that doesn't have anything consistently being run. And that's why I'm also a proponent of product ops, because I think product ops can help really make an impact there. They can drive a roadmap around what data does the team need. They can drive a roadmap around what ceremonies, what artifacts, what elements are core to how we do the job here, decision-making frameworks, things like that, so that you can, you know, whether you agree with all of those things or not, at least know what the point of view of the organization is there that can help you make some impact.
Wow, that is so rich. One thing that is resonating is PMs are people that constantly have to communicate extremely well. They have to communicate with different tiers, with different profile of people, right? At some points going slightly more technical, at some points going way above and highly business driven. So communication, decision-making, it needs consistency. It needs something that you don't even need to think about questioning if this is right. So they need to rely on the data that is coming in. This product ops discussion recently happened on the DevOps, and maybe similar to the PMs versus product owners. So it's just another discussion, but the fact is we need culture. We need this to be part of an ongoing process. This is not something that we do on demand. Someone needs to be in charge, needs to be to head this. If we can maybe take this to this secret guide, step-by-step to implement, what do you, both of you, think are pillars to implement a successful data culture, and how should companies address this? The must-haves. Mark.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of must-haves, but I'm going to start with clarity across an organization of what data is important. Again, coming back to the point I made earlier about lagging indicators, leading indicators. So many product people are just working in a slight vacuum, and not because, you know, they've got great intentions, but they're just not aware of what the big business objectives are, how that's being measured, and how their work ladders up. So I think before you even get anywhere near kind of using data to inform decisions, you need to really have visibility of what are the kind of KPIs or OKRs, whatever it is, and being able to work backwards and saying, how does my product area fit into that? I think that's really important, having that visibility, having a constant check-in, again, across the company, how the company is progressing against those metrics, because again, metrics are, you know, they're a living thing, right? It's not a one-off or once a year, end of the year, we look at the metrics. So that's really critical. And I think there's also a critical piece about getting into consistency of how we're using data. So almost, and that can be templating how we design experiments, for example, or templating, and templating sound very kind of, but, you know, just really creating some consistency of how people use data to make product decisions. So that means that you need to have some sort of decision framework that's used consistently across the organization, so that people can feed their data points into that decision-making framework. So I would say, again, you need the top level, but then you also need the more tactical piece around how do we use data consistently across the org.
Agree with everything Mark is saying. I would say most organizations that are nonprofits are trying to generate money, right? And I would say one of the biggest challenges that I've seen for product managers is in the ability to translate the effort they are putting in to changing elements of the product to the financial impact it's going to have for the organization as a whole. And so partnering with finance, with your growth teams, if you have them, with different parts of the organization, sales, customer success, all of those things can help you try to get a better sense for how are the leading indicators we are looking at contributing to lagging indicators that result in better money, better experiences, longer tenure for customers, right? And that usually takes a little bit of time and flexibility. And I don't know that any of the first iterations that come out of that process are ever the most compelling. But it's worth the effort to do that, because then in the future you have the foundation, especially if you can get the organization as a whole bought into the fact that your X percentage of increase in NPS is going to have an X amount of, money impact on retention, or fixing this problem is going to save however many hours of customer success time, which is worth however much money. Taking the time to do that and to really get a couple of those, I don't think you need a ton, but if you have a few of those relationships mapped out, it makes it a lot easier to both compare things apples to apples within your organization in terms of your strategy, but then also to more convincingly get buy-in across the rest of the organization for the things that you're generating. I think the other piece is product instrumentation. I think there are a lot of people that are working on homegrown tools and don't have, these tools that are coming out now where you can instrument every single event and start to track things at such a detailed level that it's almost like when you get there, you're like, I am overwhelmed by the amount of data that I have here. I don't even know what to do, right, with some of these things. And so I think like getting to a place where you're evaluating your product instrumentation, are you measuring the things that you're measuring, and actually taking time to invest and grow that. It's not done. It's never done, right? Have the instrumentation piece be part of your product development lifecycle, where something's not officially shipped unless it's also instrumented and you can track it, right? Like that should be part of your product development lifecycle process. And those are kind of best practices that you can start to incorporate throughout your process. And it's challenging because it takes time. And sometimes people are like, we just want to ship it right now, but it's worth getting that data because you're going to be asked about it and you're not going to be able to answer if you don't have some of those pieces. And there's tools out there now like Amplitude, which we're using, that is incredible. And then the other challenge is, like I said before, the people and the culture, right? So you bring in a new tool like Amplitude and you're instrumenting every event that you can possibly instrument, and people are going to start to use it and they're going to get it wrong. And that's okay, because there's got to be a learning curve and an adoption curve and an understanding curve within your organization. If you want to be data driven, you have to reward the effort of your team members leveraging data, even if they're not 100% right. And you have to use those opportunities to educate and upgrade and up-level the entire team skill set tied to these things, because nothing kills people's desire to use data more than the first time they try to use it and they're telling you what they found and then, smushed all of their ideas on the way that they understood the outcomes that are happening or getting criticized and put down within the organization. So I think creating a safe space where people can share their data, have open discussions, talk about the things that they're seeing, and be able to really, complement each other with their different versions of how they're looking at the data, and then learn over time why certain data points are better than others for the types of things that you're trying to measure, I think is crucial for the organization as well. One thing that I've done within my team, because I think we will often say things like, we should all be more data informed, data driven, data inspired, shouldn't we? Right? And we all agree as a team that we want to do that. And then we just continue our standard path of going through the process and doing the work that we've been planning on doing for the time that we've been, thinking about our quarterly planning, whatever the situation might be. And we will have stretch goals. So once we we had a sprint of instrumentation. So I had my entire team go through and look at the product and instrument things that were gaps that they would like to know about. And so we did that for a sprint. And then we, came up with an approach where I wanted one thing in their backlog to be something that was inspired by the data, or something that they saw was a challenge within the data that they had a strategy or a theory or an idea of how to address. And I wanted them to give me a baseline, and then I wanted to see the changes. And it's okay if it didn't move anything. The point that they actually were able to look at the data, suggest how to improve it, test something out, and then whether or not it actually improves, show me whether it did or not, is the behavior that I'm trying to generate. And if they can do it once, then they can do it again, and they can do it again. And then as you start to get better and better and better at it, you start to sort of see that, one day, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months from now, you're like, wow, we are so much more data driven today than we were 6 months ago. And it's an intentional way to kind of get your team oriented towards working with data on a regular basis.
That's perfect, Alex. There's not one thing you're gonna do to become data oriented, right? It takes time. It's about forming a mindset. We should, and we need to take a lot of actions and incentivize people in open space and give them the autonomy and the challenge and allow them to make mistakes and to learn and build on top of those mistakes, connected with what Mark shared, creating framework, and PMs, they just love frameworks. So if you encourage them, if you create this safe space, this sandbox for them and say, hey, fill in the blanks, this is well thought with the strategy. So this is outcome driven. So all you have to do is make your idea fill in here is like a good path towards learning backwards and doing the reverse engineering, right? And being able to re-implement that. But the main message here, it takes time. It's not easy. It's not something that you just have to do. You have to insist. You have to invest time. You have to dedicate. This was priceless. Guys, coming to a closing here, we've got a couple questions from the public. I want to make sure we have some time to address them. Maybe some of them already being covered when we discuss. But before we go into the Q&A, Alex and Mark, any final message, any final suggestion, recommendation for our audience? Mark, want to start?
I was going to say, with a lot of kind of product management, good product management practices, just getting started, I think it's very easy to, see data as a showstopper and say, well, I don't have the data, or I've got tons of data. Where do I start? But I always say to people, don't worry about having 15 metrics. Just pick one, get started. If that's not the right metric, you move on, you pick another one. And again, that's our role for people who are, presumably more comfortable with data, to give people that safe space, to give people that confidence to just get started. Because I think if you don't have that mentality, you can be really almost like, I was going to say paralyzed by it, because you simply don't know where to start, especially if you're not comfortable with data, or you think you have to become a data scientist overnight, then it can be really daunting, as we've said. So just I know it's basic, but just getting started is critical.
Agree. I think getting started, very, very important. Being patient with yourself, allowing yourself grace. You're not going to do it right every time, and it's okay. And reach out to your cross-functional partners. Some of the most interesting, useful, and helpful sources of data I've come across didn't really exist within the product team's kind of purview. They came from other sources. I mean, Gong, for instance, is a tool which sales uses, can be mined for all kinds of insights. And all it takes is a connection there and an invite to the platform, so you can start to mine some of that data. And there's more tools like that. So I would say, think about how you can leverage tools that other cross-functional partners have access to, rather than, just the ones that you have access to within the product management suite of tools, if you will.
Yeah. Hands to work. Yeah, let's start. Agile, just because it takes time doesn't mean you don't have to start right away. Let's start doing things. Okay, before we move to the Q&A, final message. If you from our audience like this conversation, want to become more data informed, join our free beta. The Birdie team is sharing a link on the chat. In LinkedIn, you can find a link to subscribe. You can apply to the beta program. It's going to be a pleasure to have more hands testing the solution, providing feedback, and helping us build this future where companies are data-driven, data-informed, feedback-driven, and the user is closer to the decision-making process. Q&A, just so we don't leave our fellow attendees without their answers. Starting bottom up now, very operational tips, favorite tools. We already heard about Amplitude. What other tools cannot miss in this tech? Alex?
I mean, I I have to put in a shameless plug for SurveyMonkey tools, right? Research tools where you're able to collect data and connect with your customers. So definitely would throw that one in as well. Gong is another one. I don't use it the way the sales uses it. I use it to mine for information and insights and consistent topics that are being brought up in conversations with potential customers. Slack is another one. I less for collecting information in a lot of ways, but more for information distribution. So we connect our feedback tools. We've got programs that are ongoing throughout different parts of our products that will trigger given certain conditions, asking people for their satisfaction or experience with that particular segment of the product. And then we feed those insights to specific teams through Slack. And so you're getting real-time connection of insights and information there that you can mine and swarm on, etc. Although it is also important to say in those instances to make sure that you also have the intentional practice of looking at things from a sizing frequency perspective, right? So you don't want to just go start running off in a direction because you have one comment that came through a channel like that. You want to make sure that you're doing the diligence of looking across and seeing if this is a persistent challenge for your highest value customers. But those are the things that I've used, my team has used to really get us to a place where we're much more data driven now than when we were a few years ago.
Yeah, that's it. Mark?
Really quickly, +1 on Gong, 100%. And I would also say Optimizely, particularly for designing experiments.
Okay, good. On top of that, now that we have platforms, we have data coming in, how do you decide what is relevant, what is just noise? How to filter noise so you don't get crazy and go down the rabbit hole? Any good tips on that, Mark?
Yeah, it's like I mentioned before, it's really stress testing your KPIs, really stressing your metric, like what am I trying to learn here? I think that's the only thing I can say here.
Yeah.
And once you've done that, I love that. See, the cat also wants to talk about data. Yeah, I think that is the key thing, because if you are laser focused on what is it that you're trying to learn, what is the metric that you are trying to move the needle on, or what is the insight that you're looking for, very quickly you'll be able to discard things.
Alex? Nice.
Yeah, the relevant information and how you kind of detect that from noise is, I think it's a two-part process, right? One is expanding and opening your feedback programs in such a way that you are able to collect as much information as you possibly can, and then start to size the pain of those things. And then the other piece is really through validation. So it's almost like when you're looking at the breadth of data, you're going to get a ton of stuff. Some of it is going to be things people are willing to pay for that are huge pain points that are challenging for them to deal with. And some of it's going to be just they were annoyed that day because you made them, type an extra word in, or they typed one too many and they couldn't kind of progress through the product, et cetera. And so there's an element of looking at the data, using your creative intuition to come up with where you think the most impact is going to be had. And that comes from also understanding at a deep level who your customer is, what their pain points are, and what you're trying to solve for them from a job standpoint. The other piece is validation. You're going to have theories, you're going to have hypotheses, right? And so you test those hypotheses to validate whether what that initial data told you was right or wrong. And you do that so that you don't go all the way down the path of you built it, it's launched, and now you're surprised that it didn't, have the impact that you're hoping for. You want to catch that as soon as possible so you don't invest all of your time in something like that. So I'd say think of it as a two-part process, less of a one-part process, where you're never going to get the full picture just from looking at open-ended sources of data or even intentional sources of data. You're going to want to refine that information and have hypotheses that you're validating and testing over time.
Amazing. Thank you. We're coming to the end of the hour. Before we break, I would like to thank all of the attendees who are with us, listening, learning, sharing. I hope this was as much as useful for you as it was for me to bring here on the daily basis changes we can implement tomorrow. Spock is here with us, learning as well. Alex and Mark, thank you again. Appreciate the time, appreciate all the clarity and the openness to share anything all the level of details you guys did. We still have 2 questions that we received. I think we covered that during the discussion. They are towards what if our intuition is going one way and data is telling a different story. We covered that, confirmation bias when we talk about culture and open the mindset. With the Birdie team, we can compile the answer based on the learnings here. And we get back to you guys with the answer before that. Feel free to reach out. Alex and Mark, I hope we continue this conversation in later steps. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having us.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Guys, have an amazing day. Bye-bye.